don't remember it, but in fairness, I have been squarely balls deep in those whiskey sour chronicles. So I guess we really screwed the pooch, specifically McGruff the crime dog, who has sadly died from exposure to fentanyl. Just look at this Fox News headline. Burlington, Vermont, reeling from highest number of homicides in decades after defunding police. Checkmate, Antifa! Presuming you ignore that the subhead reads, Burlington voted to defund police before reversing course the following year, and that there were never actually any layoffs. But ignoring that aforementioned checkmate, the entire story here is that the number of homicides in Burlington, population 45,000, rose from 1 in 2020 to 5 in 2022. But in 2021, the year of the supposed defunding and cops quitting in droves, Burlington had 0 homicides. All 5 of the city's 2022 homicides took place after the department was undefunded. So strange how this article cites data suggesting the opposite of its thesis. Odd. Oh, so odd. Maybe this one example is indicative of an entire narrative we have been fed over the last 3 years, which might be as fictitious as the gritty, sex-fueled adventures of Lieutenant Hieronymus Mazzelli. Come, detective. Maybe the idea that big liberal cities cut police funding, leading to catastrophic increases in violent crime, cities burning down, and offended cops fleeing the profession with pearls clenched in their meaty fists, wasn't true. If only there was a way to confirm this theory, perhaps through the magic of storytelling. What's really been going on with cops? Interior, studio. Cody, muscular but grizzled, sits in a way to obscure his lack of pants. We will now journey through the recent history of police in America, the narrative of defunding and lawlessness, and perhaps what has actually happened in the years until today. And to see how this narrative developed, we have to go back in time at least 30 years.
For a second night, demonstrations broke out over the death of George Floyd, and again there was violence. Amid the chaos, one man was shot dead. This afternoon, the National Guard was activated to respond to the unrest.
We've just had to run about a block as police moved in. We've been fired at with rubber bullets. My cameraman has been hit. We've also seen tear gas being used. Here we go, they're moving through again. This is exactly what it looks like. Exactly what it looks like. We're just staying safely.
Oh, sorry, I meant 30 today years, where every year feels like a decade. Remember those days? Remember summer of 2020? My goodness, Trump hadn't even had COVID yet. But months before what would become known as the one fun day, there were a whole lot of not so fun days. In May 2020, the nation was stunned by footage depicting a Minneapolis police officer kneeling on the neck of George Floyd for nearly 10 minutes, ultimately killing him. This resulted in a months-long protest movement, arguably the largest in U.S. history, with demands to rethink policing entirely. Specifically, there were conversations around what police are there for, what amount of physical force they should be allowed to use, and how policing could be changed to stop them from terrorizing communities and leaving people, disproportionately Black and Latino people, dead. Policy proposals to reallocate funding from police departments back to community services were grouped under the banner Defund the Police. And advocates made a pretty compelling argument. Police are unquestionably biased against Black people regardless of the race of the officers themselves, and cities spend an absurd amount of money on police, a collective $100 billion a year and $80 billion more on incarceration. Research has shown that crime in a community is largely a product of poverty, and that adding more cops doesn't really do anything to reduce it. In fact, the best way to reduce crime, research suggests, is giving people health care, access to drug treatment facilities, education, and after-school programs. You know, basic standard of living type stuff. Now, we could just give people these things anyway, independent of police budgets, given the fact that money is fake and we made it up according to our nation's 45th president, Donald Trump. Great point, Comrade Trump. But if we are pretending that there's a finite amount of money to spend on stuff, the idea was to take some of that ridiculous amount of money away from the police and put it toward the things which we know actually reduce crime. Seems like a neat idea. Unfortunately, defund the police became a controversial slogan, though the policies the movement espoused were always far more popular than the phrase itself. Kind of how universal health care varies in popularity depending on what you call it, or how there's widespread support for reducing government spending, but nobody actually wants to cut anything specific, or how when I call massages buddy rubbies, nobody seems to want one, but this is America, all right? We contain multitudes. Multitudes of toxic chemicals and microplastics, but multitudes nonetheless. So back in 2020, you heard some officials essentially advocating for defunding the police, even if they didn't use that phrasing. City council members met with activists from Black Lives Matter to discuss reassessing police budgets, and some prominent US mayors committed to the concept.
And so I have instructed and committed to, in public to that group, that our city, through our city administrative officer, identify $250 million in cuts so we could invest in jobs, in health, in education, and in healing.
Healing. Just like my buddy rubbies, and yet still no takers. That's Eric Garcetti, Los Angeles' Nepo baby mayor in 2020, basically the Kendall Roy of running a city, saying that LA would slash $250 million from the LAPD's budget. And to be fair, the city did, at first, slash the police budget by $150 million, which you might notice is $100 million less than Garcetti said, and only 8% of the total LAPD budget. But still, an attempt to make good on a promise to reallocate police funds to city services. Except what happened next played out in a similar fashion around the country. The LAPD requested a budget increase that November, and Garcetti responded by increasing their budget. Incidentally, on the same goddamn day, Derek Chauvin was found guilty in Minneapolis of murdering George Floyd. Those two events aren't technically connected, but they also kind of extremely are. Then, in 2021, the Police Commission again asked for a 12% increase in funding for cops, which Garcetti gave them most of. And so in just 2 years, Los Angeles went from defunding the police a teeny tiny bitty bit to giving the department its teeny tiny highest budget ever. But don't worry, that mayor fucked off to barely become Joe Biden's ambassador to India, and he was replaced by Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass. So maybe more of a Connor Roy with the ambassador thing. He's one of the Roys, okay? We know that. Anyway, Bass's campaign was supported by Bernie Sanders. So, there's no way she wants me to keep reading. Yeah, oops. Okay, so it says here she would further increase the police budget despite crime going down, while pledging to hire 400 more cops. And this is the real story of the last 3 years around the United States. Local officials planned to reallocate money from police departments before immediately backtracking once protesters weren't screaming outside their offices and homes anymore. In fact, since 2020, more than 80% of major cities and counties increased their police budgets by at least 2%. In nearly half of the cities, police budgets were up more than 10%. It seems like a major impact of defund the police was not an actual defunding of police, but of politicians claiming that that's what happened and then blaming that made up thing on a crime wave, which also only sort of happened, but kind of didn't happen at all.
It's outrageous that you think that you can defund the police and have safer streets. We've seen how chaotic and catastrophic this has been in communities across the United States of America. And the same thing happened in Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas defunded their police by more than $100 million. And the result was predictable. The result was last year, Austin set an all-time record for the number of murders.
Hey, neat Cody fact. Austin, Texas absolutely did not defund the police for any significant length of time, and Abbott knows this because he signed a law in 2021 banning cities from doing so. 2021 is the year of record crime he's referring to, which coincidentally also held a record for highest funding of the police that year. Their homicide rate has been steadily increasing for the last 5 years and continued to increase well after the police were defunded and then refunded. In other words, there's no correlation between defunding and crime in Austin. This has been my neat Cody fact. Plural. Facts. Okay, so cut back to that clip. Why do I recognize the guy on the right? Could it be